Step back to economy right now, or I will have you removed from this aircraft in handcuffs." The words came out of Vanessa Cole's mouth like something she had rehearsed in a mirror. Simone Carraway did not move. She did not blink. She simply looked down at the boarding pass gripped so tightly in the flight attendant's fist that the paper had begun to crease, and she smiled the smile of a woman who already knew how this story was going to end. 3 hours earlier, none of this had been true yet. Rain hammered the long glass windows of Charlotte Douglas International Airport, turning the runway lights into smeared ribbons of gold and red. Inside Concourse E, the air smelled like burnt coffee and wet umbrellas, and the overhead speakers droned out boarding calls in a language of numbers and gate letters that only frequent flyers ever fully decoded. Simone stood near a support pillar with her phone against her ear, still wearing the navy blazer she'd had on since 6 that morning, when she had signed her name on the last page of a stack of documents 4 inches thick. 39 years old, and she had just closed the deal of her life. Carraway Freight Solutions had started with one leased box truck and a phone number that rang into her studio apartment in East Point, Georgia. 14 years later, it was a logistics empire with contracts on 4 continents. And 2 hours ago, in a glass conference room on the 11th floor of a bank tower in downtown Charlotte, she had signed the paperwork that made her the sole owner of Meridian Air's parent holding company, $840 million. A regional carrier with 40,000 employees, 300 aircraft, and absolutely no idea, tonight, that its ownership had changed hands. She hadn't told anyone outside her 4-person deal team. Not her assistant. Not the board. She wanted to walk into the Meridian Air European headquarters in London tomorrow morning and watch 15 executives find out at the same time from her own mouth, standing at the head of their own table. Which was why, right now, she looked like exactly nobody. She had changed out of her blazer in an airport bathroom into an oversized gray hoodie that had belonged to her late mother, a pair of joggers and sneakers scuffed soft at the heel. Her hair was pulled back into a low bun. No jewelry except one thing: a small, tarnished luggage tag clipped to the zipper of her carry-on, so old the engraved letters had nearly worn away. R.C. Rosalind Carraway. Her mother's initials on a tag from a suitcase Rosalind had never been able to afford to fill. Rosalind Carraway had cleaned 3 houses a week in Fayetteville for 11 years to keep Simone in a magnet school uniform. She had once stood at a hotel front desk in Myrtle Beach, the one and only vacation she ever took her daughter on, and been told, in front of a line of white families, that the employee entrance was around back. Rosalind had said nothing. She had simply taken her daughter's hand, walked around to the employee entrance, and paid for a room anyway, because she refused to let one person's ugliness cancel a week she'd saved 2 years for. Simone had been 9 years old. She had never forgotten the sound of her mother's silence. She touched the luggage tag now, the way she always did before a hard flight, and walked toward 42, where Meridian Air Flight 707 to London Heathrow was boarding. Denise Holloway stood behind the gate podium, with a headset clipped over one ear and a scarf knotted so tightly around her throat it looked like it might be cutting off circulation to her personality. For the last 6 minutes, she had scanned a steady procession of gray-haired men in overcoats with bright, practiced warmth. "Welcome back, Mr. Ellison. Always a pleasure, Mr. Whitfield." Her voice rose an octave for each one. When Simone stepped onto the blue first-class carpet with her phone open to a digital boarding pass, reading Seat 2A, Denise didn't scan it. She shifted her whole body sideways, blocking the reader with her hip, the way a bouncer blocks a door. "Ma'am, this lane is for first-class and diamond members only. Main cabin boarding is Zone 5, all the way back." "I'm in the correct lane," Simone said, holding the phone up. "First class, Seat 2A. Denise didn't even glance at the screen. She let out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind meant to be heard by everyone in a 30-foot radius. People screenshot upgrades that never went through all the time, sweetheart. I don't have time to sort that out right now. Step aside. Simone held perfectly still. This was not new to her. She had spent a decade in rooms full of men who assumed the same thing Denise was assuming right now. That a young black woman standing where money and comfort lived had to be some kind of mistake. Scan the code, Simone said quietly. Let the machine tell you. Something about hearing that calm, unshaken voice made Denise's jaw tighten. She snatched the phone and slapped it against the reader, hard enough that the screen flickered. The light turned green. Carraway, Simone, 2 first class, boarding proved. For 1/2 of 1 second, something like doubt crossed Denise's face. Then her chin lifted, and the doubt was gone, replaced by a stubborn refusal to be embarrassed in front of her own podium. Must have been a system glitch earlier, she muttered, already printing a paper pass and shoving it across the counter without meeting Simone's eyes. Keep it moving, you're holding up my line. Thank you, Denise, Simone said, reading the name tag, her voice carrying a warmth that did not reach her eyes. I'll remember this. Denise rolled her eyes and turned to the next passenger with a blinding smile, and Simone walked down the jet bridge with the cold air raising goosebumps on her arms, completely unaware that Denise Holloway had been the gentlest part of her evening. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was built to feel like a private world. Warm amber lighting, wide cream leather suites, the faint hush of a cabin designed to make $40,000 feel invisible. Near the forward galley, arranging of warmed towels with the precision of a surgeon, stood Vanessa Cole, lead flight attendant, blonde hair pinned into a French twist, so severe it looked painful, lipstick the color of a stop sign. Vanessa's hands froze mid-fold. The moment Simone crossed the threshold, she stepped directly into the aisle, planting herself like a locked gate. Hi there, she said, eyes moving slowly down the gray hoodie, the joggers, the sneakers. I think you took a wrong turn, hon. Economy's through those curtains, all the way back. I haven't taken a wrong turn, Simone said. I'm exactly where my ticket says I should be. She handed over the paper pass. Vanessa took it by one corner, like she was handling something contaminated, squinted at the seat number, and marched to a wall-mounted tablet, jabbing at the screen with unnecessary force. Let me just check the manifest, she said, in a voice that made clear she expected the manifest to agree with her, not the passenger. That was when a booming voice rolled up the jet bridge behind them. About time we started boarding. I've been in that lounge for 2 hours. Preston Kingsley filled the cabin doorway in a charcoal suit that had clearly never touched an overhead bin, a leather briefcase swinging from one hand. The easy confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life had a door closed in his face. He was a platinum-tier flyer on this route every month, and Vanessa's whole posture changed the second she saw him, spine straightening, smile blooming, voice sliding an entire register warmer. Mr. Kingsley, we are so sorry for the delay. Always good to see you, Vanessa. He glanced past her into the cabin, and his eyes landed on 2A. His brow furrowed. Hang on, the app showed first fully booked when I checked in. I'm stuck in 14C, but that seat right there looks empty. Simone watched Vanessa's eyes flick from Kingsley to her and back again, and she watched the exact half-second in which Vanessa Cole made a decision. Not a mistake, a decision. Actually, Mr. Kingsley, Vanessa said loud enough for the first 6 rows to hear, there's been a ticketing error. That seat's available. Go ahead and get comfortable. That is my seat, Simone said. I'm holding the boarding pass for it right now. Kingsley gave her the same head-to-toe glance Vanessa had given her, then scoffed. Sounds like you've got a situation. He stepped past her toward 2A. Ma'am, Vanessa said, and her voice dropped into something practiced and cold. I've just confirmed. Your pass triggered a fraud flag. It looks like you may have used an invalid staff code to upgrade yourself out of economy. The lie was so smooth, so instant, that for one full second Simone actually felt the ground tilt beneath the sheer audacity of it. "I paid $11,000 for this ticket. 4 days ago," she said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a weight that made two businessmen lower their newspapers. "There is no flag. The gate scanner approved it. Return my pass and step aside." "Do not speak to me in that tone," Vanessa gasped, one hand flying to her chest. "You are being aggressive." And there it was. The oldest trick in the oldest book. Turn the woman standing calmly in the aisle into the threat, so that whatever happens to her next looks like something she brought on herself. "Just call security." Kingsley sighed, already loosening his tie in seat 2A. "I don't have time for people trying to game the system." "Final warning," Vanessa said, voice trembling with a fear that did not match her face at all. "Return to economy, or I am calling the flight deck." Simone crossed her arms. Call him. The tension in that cabin went so tight it could have snapped a window. Vanessa spun to the intercom, punched a code, and spoke in a hushed, urgent whisper that Simone caught in pieces anyway. Aggressive. Refusing instructions. Fraudulent pass. Threatening a passenger. Less than a minute later, the cockpit door clicked and swung open, and Captain Walter Briggs stepped out. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, the face of a man who had given orders for 30 years and never once had them questioned. "What is going on, Vanessa?" "We are already behind schedule." Vanessa pointed a trembling finger. "Captain, this passenger boarded first with a fraudulent pass. When I asked her to return to her seat so Mr. Sir Kingsley could take his rightful upgrade, she became hostile and refused to move." "It's true, Walt," Kingsley called from his seat, not even bothering to look up. Woman tried to steal a seat right out from under a paying customer. Captain Briggs did not ask to see the boarding pass, still crumpled in Vanessa's fist. He did not ask Simone a single question. He looked at the young black woman in the gray hoodie, looked at his trusted lead attendant, looked at the well-dressed regular, and made the same calculation every single person in that aisle had already made. "Ma'am," Briggs said, loud enough to be heard in row 10, "I do not tolerate disruptions on my aircraft. You have 2 choices. You walk back to your assigned seat and sit there quietly for the next 7 hours. Or I call the police right now, and you walk off in cuffs. You have 10 seconds. Simone tilted her head. "And what happens to Mr. Kingsley, who is sitting in a seat he didn't pay for?" "That is not your concern," Briggs snapped. 5 seconds. "Call him," Simone said, for the second time that night. Briggs grabbed the intercom. "Port authority to gate 42, immediately." Unruly passenger requiring extraction. The heavy tread of boots came up the jet bridge, less than 90 seconds later. Officer Dale Marsh stepped through the aircraft door first, a broad man with a gray-flecked beard and a hand, resting near his belt out of pure habit, his partner a half-step behind him. Marsh took in the scene the way cops are trained to take in scenes: a commanding captain, a distressed flight attendant, a well-dressed businessman, and one calm woman standing in an aisle in a gray hoodie. The story wrote itself before anyone said a word, because it was a story this country has told itself 1,000 times before. "Ma'am," Marsh said, stepping forward, boxing her against the galley wall with his partner, "I need you to gather your things and walk with me off this aircraft." Simone did not raise her hands. She did not raise her voice. She looked Officer Marsh directly in the eye with a stillness that seemed to unsettle him more than screaming ever could have. "Officer Marsh," she said, reading his name tag, "before you put a hand on me, I'd ask you to wait 15 seconds. I don't play games, ma'am. 10 seconds. "Get her off my plane," Briggs barked, his face reddening. 5 seconds, Simone said, sliding her phone from the hoodie pocket and pressing it to her ear. "If you don't remove her," Briggs said to the officers, "I will." The call connected on the first ring. "Nathaniel," Simone said, her voice changing completely. Gone was the patient passenger, and in her place stood the woman who had signed $840 million of paperwork 4 hours earlier. "Are you still in the building?" On the other end, Nathaniel Voss, the outgoing CEO of Meridian Air, a man who had 3 hours prior handed her the keys to his entire company, sounded confused. "Yes, Simone. I'm packing up my office. Is something wrong? You should be in the air by now. I'm at Gate 42, Flight 707. I need you to patch into this aircraft's internal PA system right now. And bring HR with you." That was the moment two Port Authority officers, boots striking the jet bridge floor in unison, pushed through the aircraft door, and the entire cabin, for one long, silent second, seemed to stop breathing at once. Officer Marsh's hand was still resting on his belt. Vanessa's chin was lifted in righteous triumph. Captain Briggs stood with his arms folded, sure he had already won. Nobody in that cabin yet understood that the story they thought they were watching had already ended 3 hours ago. In a glass conference room, on the 11th floor of a bank tower, on the last page of a stack of paper 4 inches thick. "Ma'am," Marsh said, "step off the aircraft now." Simone slipped the phone back into her pocket. "You'll want to give it about 90 seconds, officer." "I've given you enough time," Briggs snapped. "Officers, remove her." Marsh reached for her arm. Click. A sharp burst of static rolled through the cabin's overhead speakers, loud enough that every single person aboard, officers, crew, passengers, Kingsley mid-sip of his stolen champagne, froze in place. This was not the galley phone. This was an override, patched in from somewhere far above the aircraft, from a source none of the crew had ever heard interrupt boarding before. "Attention, all crew and passengers aboard Meridian Air Flight 707. The voice was rich, unhurried, and instantly recognizable to every Meridian employee on that plane, because it was the same voice from every company town hall video they'd ever been forced to watch. It was Nathaniel Voss. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Kingsley's smug half-smile evaporated. Captain Briggs went rigid, the blood draining out of his face in real time, because there was exactly one reason the outgoing CEO of Meridian Air would be broadcasting directly into a cockpit's cabin speakers on a random Tuesday night. This is Nathaniel Voss, speaking from the executive offices in Charlotte. "I am using the emergency communications override to address a situation currently unfolding in your forward cabin. Effective 4 hours ago, the parent holding company of Meridian Air was acquired in a private transaction. I have resigned as Chief Executive Officer. The airline, its fleet, and every subsidiary now belong, in full, to Carraway Freight Solutions." The cabin had gone so silent that the hum of the auxiliary power unit sounded like a scream. "I am speaking now to introduce your new owner and your new Chief Executive Officer. She is currently standing in your aisle, in your first-class cabin. Captain Briggs, Miss Cole. I would suggest you listen to her very, very carefully. Her name is Simone Carraway." Click. The line went dead, and the silence that followed felt like the inside of a held breath. For 10 full seconds, nobody moved. Officer Marsh slowly, deliberately, lifted his hand off his belt and took a full step backward, putting distance between himself and a woman he had, 90 seconds earlier, been prepared to drag off a plane in handcuffs. "Cad." Captain Briggs's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His shoulders folded inward, 30 years of unquestioned command collapsing in real time. Because he had just ordered the arrest of the woman, who now owned his paycheck, his pension, and the aircraft under his own boots. But it was Vanessa Cole whose face told the real story. Every ounce of blood had left it. Her red lipstick sat against her skin like a wound. The boarding pass she had crumpled in her fist minutes earlier was shaking so hard the paper rattled audibly in the silence. Simone broke it first. Now, she said, calm, level, terrifying in its evenness, "I believe we were discussing my seat." I had no idea," Briggs stammered. All the command gone from his voice, replaced by something close to a child's fear. "The crew wasn't informed of any acquisition. If you had known who I was, Simone said, cutting him off with surgical precision, you would have treated me with basic decency. Is that the standard of hospitality on my aircraft, Captain? That respect is only earned by those who sign your check. Briggs swallowed. Sweat had broken out along his hairline, despite the cabin's air conditioning. No, ma'am. There was a flag on the ticketing system, I was told. By whom? It wasn't a question, it was a scalpel. Briggs's eyes cut sideways to Vanessa Cole, and in one motion, 30 years of loyalty evaporated into pure self-preservation. I was acting on information from my lead flight attendant. Vanessa let out a raw, wounded sound. Betrayal, disbelief, the sudden understanding that the man she'd looked to for backup had just thrown her straight under the landing gear to save himself. Let's talk about that information, Miss Cole, Simone said, turning her full attention to the flight attendant, extending an open palm. My boarding pass. Vanessa's hand shook so badly she could barely release the paper. Simone smoothed it flat and held it up. Seat 2A, printed at the gate, approved by the scanner. She turned to the tablet on the galley wall. Show me the flag. Vanessa didn't move. You can't, Simone said, quieter now, and somehow that quiet was more frightening than any shout could have been. Because there is no flag. There never was. You saw a black woman in a hoodie walk into your cabin, and you decided, on your own, that she didn't belong there. You lied to your captain. You lied to a federal officer. You tried to have me removed from an aircraft I own in handcuffs to make room for a man who didn't even pay for the seat. No, Vanessa said, tears finally breaking loose, streaking dark lines through her mascara. No, please, Miss Carraway. I thought there was a mistake, Mr. Kingsley is a regular. Mr. Kingsley, Simone said, turning, and Kingsley, who had spent the last 90 seconds trying to disappear into the leather of seat 2A, flinched like he'd been struck. You were ticketed in 14C, economy. You demanded a seat you did not pay for, and encouraged the illegal removal of a paying customer to get it. I always get the upgrade, Kingsley said, pulling at his tie like it had suddenly tightened on its own. I fly this route every month. I'm platinum. Not on my airline, Simone said. Officer Marsh, Mr. Kingsley is disrupting my cabin and attempting to defraud the EDSA's services he did not purchase. Please escort him off my aircraft. Marsh, visibly relieved to be on the winning side of whatever had just happened, didn't hesitate. Let's go, sir. Grab your bag. This is outrageous. Kingsley blustered as the officers flanked him and marched him back up the aisle. Any idea? Who? Nobody cares. Preston, a voice called from row 6, and the cabin actually laughed, a short, sharp release of tension. Applause rippling down the aisle as the man who'd demanded her arrest 20 minutes earlier was walked off the plane in front of everyone, whose stock portfolios he'd been quietly bragging about for the last hour. Simone turned back to Captain Briggs. A captain's first responsibility is the safety of every person on this aircraft, she said. Not just the ones who look like they belong in first. You didn't ask a single question tonight. You saw a story that matched what you already believed, and you acted as judge and executioner. You are grounded, effective immediately. Pack your bag. Briggs opened his mouth, found nothing to say, and closed it again. He walked back into the cockpit like a man 20 years older than he'd been 10 minutes earlier. Vanessa was still weeping against the galley counter when Simone turned to her one last time. Please, Vanessa said. I have a daughter, a mortgage. I made a mistake. I'll do anything, please don't. A mistake is spilling coffee, Simone said, and there was no anger left in her voice at all. Only a terrible, final quiet. What you did tonight was a decision. You decided I didn't belong before I ever opened my mouth. And if I were anyone else, if I were just a woman who'd saved for 2 years to take this trip, you would have succeeded, and I'd be in a holding cell right now while you poured Mr. Kingsley his champagne. Vanessa had nothing left to say, because she knew, in the marrow of her bones, that it was true. You're terminated, Miss Cole. Leave your wings on the counter. Simone didn't wait for a reply. She turned, walked the length of the cabin, and lowered herself into seat 2A, where a young flight attendant named Marcus, who had watched the entire exchange from behind the curtain, hands shaking, uncertain whether speaking up would end his career before it started, stepped forward at last. "Miss Carraway?" His voice wavered, but he stood straight. "I'm the senior crew member left on board. Operations is sending a replacement captain across the tarmac now." "Thank you, Marcus," Simone said, and something in her face softened for the first time all night. "Make sure the passengers in the back get a round of drinks on the house for the delay." "Right away, ma'am. And on behalf of the rest of us, I'm sorry for how you were treated tonight." "You didn't do it, Marcus." "That's the difference." He nodded and disappeared toward the back, and Simone finally let herself exhale, resting her head against the leather seat, her fingers finding the worn luggage tag clipped to her carry-on strap, RC. She thought of her mother walking calmly around to a hotel's back entrance 30 years ago, saying nothing, refusing to let one clerk's cruelty steal a vacation she'd saved 2 years to afford. She thought, not tonight, not on my plane, not ever again if I can help it. Heavy footsteps came up the jet bridge one more time. Denise Holloway, the gate agent, marching in with the final passenger manifest and a satisfied little smirk, having just watched Preston Kingsley get frog-marched off in handcuffs, and assumed, in her prejudiced heart, that it had been the woman in the hoodie who'd finally gotten what was coming to her. "Well, that's a relief," Denise said loudly. Not yet looking down the aisle. "Did they finally drag that girl in the sweatpants off the plane? I told her she didn't belong in that lane." The silence that met her was so total it felt physical. Marcus went rigid. Denise stepped past the galley curtain and looked down the aisle. And there, in seat 2A, swirling a glass of champagne she hadn't asked for, sat Simone. No police, no Vanessa, no Captain Briggs. Denise's face as you and fight. You're still. Where's Vanessa? Where's the captain?" "Currently unemployed," Simone said pleasantly. "Much like you're about to be." Denise let out a shaky, disbelieving laugh. "You can't fire anyone. You're just Denise." A man in a sharp suit stepped through the aircraft door, a Meridian corporate badge on his lapel, an HR representative just behind him. It was Nathaniel Voss himself, who had moved fast. "Hand over your gate credentials. Your access has been revoked, sir." "She's the one who—" "She is Simone Carraway," Voss said, his voice stripped of any warmth at all. "As of this evening, she owns this airline. Give me your badge, or I will have Port Authority escort you out for trespassing." The clipboard slipped from Denise's fingers and clattered to the cabin floor. The full weight of what she'd just said, out loud, to the new owner of the entire airline, crashed down all at once. She hadn't just profiled a passenger. She'd mocked her own new boss to her face. "Miss Carraway, please, I was just stressed, "You weren't stressed," Simone said quietly. "You were certain. That's worse." She held her gaze one more second. "Have a safe trip home, Denise." 12 minutes later, a new captain boarded, offered a crisp, sincere apology, and the aircraft doors finally closed. As the 777 lifted off the wet Charlotte runway into the dark, Simone didn't sleep. She opened her laptop and began writing what would become, 18 hours later, a memo that reshaped an entire airline. The next morning, gold light spilled over the Thames and through the windows of Meridian Air's European headquarters, where 15 executives sat around a long mahogany table, having been summoned to an emergency 8 a.m. meeting with no explanation. Rumors had already traveled faster than the red eye. Something about a stealth acquisition, something about a captain, a flight attendant, and a gate agent, all fired in the same 20-minute window over JFK airspace. At 8 o'clock sharp, the doors opened. Simone walked in wearing a charcoal suit, so sharp it looked engineered, heels striking the hardwood with the rhythm of a verdict. She did not sit. She placed her palms flat on the table and looked one by one into the eyes of every executive in that room. "My name is Simone Carraway," she said. "As of last night, I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of Meridian Air." A murmur rippled through the room. One look from her silenced it. "By now you've heard the rumors about Flight 707. They're true. I fired a captain, a lead flight attendant, and a gate agent within the same half hour." She let that sit in the room. "I didn't fire them for a paperwork error. I fired them because this company has built a culture where frontline employees are permitted, encouraged, to decide, on site, who deserves respect and who doesn't." They looked at a woman in a hoodie and decided she was worth less than the man in the suit standing beside her. If that's how they treat someone holding an $11,000 ticket, I am terrified to imagine how this airline treats the family's flying economy on the worst day of their lives. An executive near the back cleared his throat. "Ms. Carraway, with respect, mandatory retraining across 40,000 employees globally would be an enormous cost. Our margins are already. The cost of losing my trust is higher," Simone said, not raising her voice at all. "If you're more worried about the price of basic decency than the practice of it, your resignation letter is welcome on my desk before my coffee gets cold." He didn't say another word. "Effective today," Simone continued, "every employee of this airline, baggage handler to boardroom, completes mandatory bias and de-escalation training. Every discrimination complaint routes directly to an independent oversight board outside this building, so it can never again be buried by the people it's filed against. We are not just flying planes. We are in the business of dignity. Whether someone boards in a briefoni suit or a second-hand A, whether they're sitting in 2A or row 44, they will be treated like they belong. Because on this airline, from today forward, they do." She sat down at the head of the table and opened her laptop, and 15 executives who had walked in expecting a routine Tuesday understood all at once that the airline they used to work for had ended on a runway in Charlotte the night before. 6 months later, a new captain named Diane Reyes flew Flight 77 out of Charlotte to London, and a young flight attendant named Marcus Whitfield, promoted twice since that night, stood at the boarding door greeting every single passenger by name, whatever they were wearing. Complaints about discrimination at Meridian Air had dropped by 91%. Denise Holloway, Vanessa Cole, and Walter Briggs had all quietly disappeared from the airline's employee directory, and none of them ever publicly admitted, even once, that they'd been wrong. That was, in its own way, the most honest ending any of them could have gotten, because people who build a whole identity on being right rarely learn anything from being caught. They just lose everything and call it unfair. Simone still keeps that same worn luggage tag clipped to a different bag now, a nicer one, the kind her mother never got to own. Sometimes, boarding a flight of her own, she runs her thumb over the faded initials, RC, and remembers a hotel lobby in Myrtle Beach and a 9-year-old girl who never forgot the sound of her mother's silence. She never raises her voice anymore. She's learned she doesn't have to. If this story made your blood boil, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere around that jet bridge, that reaction is worth paying attention to, because somewhere tonight, someone is standing in a lane just like that one, being told they don't belong by someone who has no idea who they're talking to. If this story meant something to you, hit like so it reaches someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's ever been underestimated for what they were wearing instead of who they were. And tell me in the comments, have you ever stood in that aisle on either side of it? I read every single one.